The secretary call roll, please.
Len Philpott. Co-chair Dan Garber.
Here.
Annette Glankoff. Here. Jennifer Hedderly. Here. Hamilton Hitchings. Co-chair Arthur Keller.
Here.
Shawnee Kleinhaus. Steve Levy. Don McDougall. Whitney McNair. Julia Moran. Bonnie Packer. Lisa Peshke-Cote. Doria Suma. Amy Sung. Jason Titus. Elaine Wang. Ellen Erbrock. Alex Van Riesen. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to the last meeting of the CAC. Several of you have to leave this evening. Can I get a show of hands of everybody that needs to go? I know that Don and Doria and Shani, anyone else? Jennifer. And I know that Don's leaving immediately. Shani, you need to leave when?
I'm leaving at about 6:30.
Okay. And Jennifer, when do you need to go? Okay. I had hoped to do the continual learning piece, the feedback piece, with as many people as we can. So, how many people have comments on on our first agenda item, the action on the cover, introduction, governance chapter, and glossary? I'm seeing one hand, two hands. 3 hands. Well, maybe we can get through that quickly. And then I'm thinking that before we lose people, if it all seems okay, maybe we would do the feedback first and then go to the other items. Is that okay with people? Okay. With that, before we get into that, I'm not seeing anyone here for oral communications from the public. And staff, do you have some opening comments before we get to our agenda items?
Yes, thank you, and thanks to all of you for your service on the committee. I hope you will make time to come to the council on June 5th for a proclamation thanking the CAC for its work. I don't know exactly what time it'll be, but my guess is it's going to be around 6 o'clock. It always happens right at the beginning of the meeting, so you don't have to stay for the whole darn thing. But we will get you more information about the exact time as the day gets closer. Then just really fast, I know the time is short, and those of you who have been watching know all the details here, but on May 1st, Council received again your recommendations on land use and transportation. Staff had made a bunch of changes based on their earlier review and really tried to tighten up the programs and reduce redundancies and the like. Very well received. I think the Council made substantive changes you could count on your hand. I mean, it was really not a lot of substantive change. On transportation, they accepted our recommendation about infrastructure improvements, a whole list that we included in the narrative, and they wanted a policy on autonomous vehicles, which was something new and great. We're happy to add that. On land use, they really confirmed all of the policy direction that they had weighed in on before, and they liked the way what we had done as a staff is take a lot of the housing programs and policies that the CAC had worked on and group them together towards the beginning of the element, and they bought off on that. The new policy that they asked us to add was about school impacts. It's really a carryover from the existing comp plan, so we're working on language for that, which will go back to them when they see all of the elements together on June 12th. Then last night, they heard natural environment and safety. Once again, very appreciative of the CAC's work, particularly the subcommittees that worked really hard on that, on those elements. They did, make some edits and changes, but nothing that kind of rocked our world. I think it was, on the whole, the very well-received work products. They continued business and economics to next week, so we'll be doing that at the council next week. Then, as I mentioned, June 5th is a proclamation honoring all of you. And then June 12th will be the last council opportunity to provide us with feedback before they refer this to the Planning and Transportation Commission Our hope is the Planning and Transportation Commission will complete their work over the summer, and it will go back to the council for final adoption in October. So we may be calling on you come this fall, even though your work is done, but we may want you to come back for a command performance and support the council in adoption of the final work product that we've all put so much time and energy into. So that's the wrap-up. Oh, and I know Annette wanted to make sure everybody was aware of a meeting that PAN is holding this weekend, or no, the 24th, right?
Well, I'll just
25th.
comment on it. One of the hot topics, although it's sort of diagonally related to the comp plan, but not 100% in the comp plan, is ADUs, accessory dwelling units. And on next Thursday night, 7 to 9, Mitchell Park, Palo Alto Neighborhoods, and Jonathan Late, who is Hillary's number 2, are going to be presenting. It's not going to be a pro or con meeting. It's just going to be, let's get the facts, nothing but the facts, ma'am. So I think it'll be really interesting. And there's a lot of questions out there, and staff has done an absolute wonderful job of trying to figure out all the answers so it can be presented in just a very forthright way. And Arthur gets compliments also for his input to the process.
Hamilton?
Hillary, this is, I don't know how to ask this question, but how much change is the PTC going to make, and like, what is that process like?
Well, the PTC's role is to review and make a recommendation. The PTC and the council recently met in joint session, and Doria can tell you more offline, but I think the council was pretty clear, don't reinvent the wheel. We want you to do a review. We know you can add value to this work product, but you only have 90 days, and we really don't want to rethink the big policy issues. So that was their direction, and we'll have to see. We're going to be working with them pretty intensively over the summer to help them formulate a recommendation and get it back to the council in September.
Okay. With that, rather than going down the line, it seems like we only have a couple of comments. Who would like to go first? Annette?
Say I'm obviously technically unimpaired. Just really, I think most of my comments I turned in writing, but the one thing I was struck with as I was reading through this, and maybe it's my older eyes, is that although this looks really nice, when you start looking at some of these little green headings, I could hardly read them. So that might just be something to think about, increasing the font size. I'm not so sure why it's smaller. So most of my other questions, I'll just go through them really quickly. In the topic meeting residential and commercial needs, I wanted to get a plug for locally owned neighborhood serving businesses. And I think we need to continually put that in the plan. I was concerned that, especially after listening to council go on and on about, visionary, let's not have specific examples. In meeting residential needs, there's something in the first paragraph about attracting businesses, especially in the areas of mobility and greenhouse reduction. And I thought that was being too specific. Not that we don't want to do that. It's very admirable, but I would like to see that wording eliminated, because you could probably go through a whole long list of things that you'd like to attract. In providing responsive governance and leadership, most of my comments would be it encourages collaboration among citizens, businesses, and I think it should be neighborhood associations and local officials. So neighborhood associations sort of got left out, and I'd like to see that highlighted. This, again, is already in writing. There was a table that is in the uses and organization of the plan, and there's some word table above, and I don't know how it's going to all sort out when you edit it, but I would remove the word above, so you'll make sure the table, it refers to table 1, and so make sure that table 1 is really above the text as opposed to below it or on the next page. In that section, the uses and organization of the plan, I was really struck by the fact that you wanted to omit this concept about somewhere, the goal, they talked about goals, policies, is a specific statement of principle or guiding actions that implies a clear commitment but is not mandatory. I would like to see but is not mandatory left in there. I'm not sure why that was omitted. I think that was very clear what the council said. In implementing the plan, and I have a question on that, is there was some comment about prioritization. And I didn't realize that we really were going to prioritize actually policies or goals. So I thought maybe we would do high, medium, and low, or a year time frame. And so if we aren't going to do the prioritization in the comp plan, then I'm not sure we need the statement, the city council may change the prioritization of programs through the regular 5-year cycle. I mean, that's always been a council prerogative. So you just might want to look at that and make sure it's consistent with what the council has. In the governance section, basically, I have a couple places where I think that neighborhood associations need to be called out. And probably one of the biggest, really, changes I'd like to see under Goal 4, Program G41D, they talk about new members and new welcome people coming in, or the real estate environment. And they talk about an appreciation package, and that wording doesn't work for me. I would say a welcome package. I think that really works better than appreciation. Somehow that seemed very marketing. So you can read the small little wording changes, but basically it has to do with the addition of neighborhood associations and rentals. It says discounted rates, but it also should say complimentary, because the neighborhood associations have had a long set of discussions with the city manager and council about providing free meeting space to neighborhood associations once a year. So I think that would make it more accurate.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer, are you ready?
Sure. I apologize, I wasn't here last month when you all discussed the governance chapter, so I don't have lengthy comments, but I do have a couple. First, specifically, program G 3.1, the staff report indicates that a specific reference to PAUSD was added, but there's no reference to PAUSD. It's about regional collaboration, and I do think that needs to be explicitly called out in the governance chapter. Bigger concern was sort of more generally, I thought what was really missing from this chapter was any discussion of maintaining public trust, that as part of our governance vision, that we want to have an inclusive, transparent, accountable governance process. And it seems to me that there ought to be something in there that goes to those issues, which are important to everybody. Do you want implementation section comments now also, or no? Oh, okay. All right, I just had a couple there also. On page, that's the narrative, I guess, the introductory narrative? Yeah. What did I say? Something different. Sorry. Page 2, the bottom of page 2, maintaining and enhancing community character. In council's discussion, last comp plan discussion, there was some talk about whether or not the comp plan should take a position on more or less or same amount of new development. And I think the way this last addition here, future land decisions will encourage sustainable development, infill within the urban service area, and neighborhood preservation. I think the intent is that we want infill when it happens to happen in the urban service area. But as it reads, it looks as though it's saying we want to encourage infill in the urban service area, and it wasn't clear to me that that was council's direction. So I would prefer to see it say limit infill to the urban service area, and I would like to see neighborhood preservation move to the middle of that 3-item list. Page 5 deletes that clause about thriving business community that serves local residents and brings revenue to the city, but not at the expense of the city's residential neighborhoods. I would like to see that clause restored. And finally, page 110. I'm not sure what the motivation was or why there was a change from, in the second paragraph under implementing the plan. There's added language that, let me find the beginning. Decisions about development projects, capital improvements, et cetera, will be reviewed for conformance to evaluate consistency with the plan. I think conformance was the old comp plan language. And that's been deleted. I'm not sure why we would change that from asking for conformance to just evaluating whether there's consistency. To me, there's a substantive different meaning between those two phrases, so I would like to see conformance restored. Thank you.
Thank you, Doria, and then Hamilton. Were there others after Hamilton? Shani.
Thanks, and sorry, I also missed the last meeting. But with regards to the governance element, the general tone of it kind of surprised me because it seemed to be about development and planning more than governance. And I think I agree with the previous two speakers. I thought a sense of the responsibility and the trust that the electorate places on elected officials was kind of missing in this, and I'd like to see more of that. And also I thought there was too much of an emphasis on regional responsibilities. With regards to the specific phrase that Jen just mentioned, I would like to see that included also, but promote commerce, but not at the expense of residential neighborhoods. I thought the comment about mobility areas and greenhouse gas reduction areas that Annette mentioned was kind of funny because I don't think of greenhouse gas reduction. It's not like you can contain that to an area. It's every place, and you can't even contain it to Palo Alto. So that I thought that could have been worded better. I understand that some of these comments are holdovers from the previous plan, but there's a bunch of stuff about giving boards and commissions more decision-making authority, which I understand was in the old plan, but I think it should have been taken out because it's inconsistent then with the chart that describes the boards and commissions' duties, and the Planning Commission and ARB are advisory bodies, especially the Planning Commission, I think. So I think I think that could be improved. Yeah, I thought the general tone was not as much about the duties and responsibilities of governance as much as it was sort of about reiterating things about planning and development efficiencies. So, and then I feel a little bit like at the end here we got really rushed, and I understand that everybody wants to keep it on schedule for the council and the planning commission, but I think it's a little unfortunate we didn't have a subcommittee for governance and that we really had no time to do any correlations of the elements across the entire comp plan. Thanks.
Hamilton, and then Shani.
First, I want to agree with a couple of points from the previous speakers. Doria's point on the commission and board and committee duties, and updating that language. And the second is on the difficulty of reading. I had a really hard time reading this too. The black on the dark green and really small font is tough. And my eyesight's not that bad, so I think that would be helpful if it was a little easier to read. My primary comment, though, is not my own. I wanted to read a letter that was submitted by one of the members of the community, Nielsen Buchanan. I'd like my last words on this committee not to be my own, but to be those of somebody else in the community. And so I'm just going to read his letter, which, since he's out of town today, I strongly urge everyone to take to heart and mind a key value statement in the comp plan. To paraphrase, currently there's a prominent statement that the city strives to promote commerce, but not at the expense of residential neighborhoods. And then he adds, in the quest of modernizing the comp plan, I hope leaders in the council will note and amplify this statement. This statement should be positioned in the introduction of the comp plan. That's my comment.
Thank you. Shani?
I agree with Doria and Jen on their comments, and also with Hamilton. My comments are about the glossary. Can I go into those? Okay,
Yes.
so the first one is the creek setback. In Palo Alto, it's defined at top of the creek bank, like the exact top of the bank. Every other community, including the agencies that look at that, define the top of the bank or the drip line of the immediate riparian vegetation, whichever is wider. So that way you actually protect the drip line and the riparian vegetation as well. So I think that should be here because that's the custom for every community except for Palo Alto, the drip line. So that's on page 13. On page 21, green infrastructure, I think adding connectivity for wildlife, we've talked about that, and potentially, adding to the green infrastructure. First, he talks about natural features, but often it's constructed features, like we do things for like swales for water, stormwater, things like that. So it's not all natural. Some of it is actually architectured or designed, but the wildlife connectivity here is very important, so maybe both these things. Page 41 talks about resiliency, and I think the word ecology is missing. So a system to absorb the effect of climate change, maintain, I think ecological function should also be part of that, not just human function. And I'm not sure we're only talking about climate change. I think there's a lot of different things that deal with resiliency that have to do with dealing with big shifts. It could be a flood, it could be an economic downturn, it could be a lot of different things, and they're not all natural. So those are, I think that's what I had. Oh, one more. The definition of creek on page 12. It talks about natural water courses flowing from the hills to San Francisco Bay, usually characterized by a distinct channel and a band of dense vegetation along the banks. Though we've discussed urban creeks as well, so even though they're in concrete, they're still creeks, and we wanted to treat them differently, but we don't want to ignore them. So I think we need to have maybe split that in some way into two types of creeks. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Arthur?
Thank you. So I think I really appreciate the work of staff, the work of this committee. I think it was a lot of work that we did over about a year and a half, give or take. And I also would like to agree with pretty much the comments that have been made in this session just now. And I'll just add to what Shani said just a moment ago, because I do think we should think about channelized creeks which are in concrete versus creeks that are more of a natural riparian kind of setting. And that also needs the distinction between those that are like San Francisco Creek, which is more of a natural setting. Some of the creeks that go through Barron Park, some of them are more natural, some of them are less natural. And then west of Foothill Expressway. And I think that those distinctions tried to be captured to some extent. And then there was a whole discussion about it at the city council the other night. But I think that clarification in this definition would be helpful. I also provided some definitions, some improvements to definitions, which I assume are not controversial in my comments. I'm not going to repeat them. But one thing is I mentioned electric vehicles supply equipment, which is useful because of in the transportation element, and it's not defined properly there, so that could be used there. I basically think that it's great that we've got to the stage, and I look forward to hearing your comments in the next portions about where we go from here.
Just a couple of quick ones for me. It is not clear to me whether we need potentially 2 additional items in the glossary. One is a definition of applicant, and the other one is a definition of property owner. I don't know if we use that language in particular in the land use element, but if we do, it would be worth defining those as a way to help people not always use the word developer, which we tend to use like Kleenex, and it loses meaning. My other comments were nits, but I did want to agree with the meeting residential and commercial needs. My sense there is that there needs to be stronger emphasis on the interests of the residential neighborhoods and the residents first before the commercial ones, and I think that's pretty consistent with the view of this committee. Annette? That was my last one, so go ahead.
Well, I just have to comment on what Shani said. We really need to look at the resilience definition. To be honest, I did not look and read every single one of these definitions, and I applaud Shani for doing so. But that has nothing to do with, we use the term all the time in emergency preparedness, so let me get a better definition for at least that component, if everyone's agreed to, and we can, that should be added.
Okay, I'm not seeing anyone. Ellen?
Microphone.
Please add to the glossary a definition of a stakeholder.
Okay, if there's nothing else, I'm sorry, what? Arthur?
It's interesting, the definition of resilience really in here, that's on page 45, talks about resilience with respect to climate issues, future effects, maintained function of climate change. That was different from, I think, the definition that people talked about, and the council was talking about with respect to the public safety building last night, where resilience was with respect to things like earthquakes, natural disasters, floods, terrorist attacks, and things like that. So I just wanted to postscript that to what Annette just said.
All right, I'm not seeing any other people that would like to speak. Would someone like to make a motion to recommend this to the council? Hillary.
Yeah, and I'd just like to clarify, I think the easiest thing to do would be to get a motion to transmit these drafts with the CAC's comments. I don't know that we're going to be able to do another iteration before the 12th. If we can, we would, but if not, we'll do what we did in the prior elements, which is transmit your comments and the transcript.
Arthur?
I move that the CAC recommend adoption of the
Cover introduction.
the cover introduction,
governance glossary.
glossary and governance to the council. Give the staff discretion to be able to include the non-controversial things that we talked about tonight and the comments submitted tonight, and transmit that to the council along with our minutes and notes.
Seconded by Annette. All those in favor? Raising hands. All those opposed? None. Any abstentions? One abstention. Jennifer.
I would have liked to abstain just from the governance section since I hadn't participated in that process.
Fair enough. Okay. If I may, I'd like to take a few minutes here and talk about goals and pluses and deltas, if that's okay.
Are we talking about, I thought we were talking about.
We were going to do the goals first because several people have to leave.
Okay.
And then we'll go back to that.
Okay.
I am now walking over to something called a flip chart. So I wanted to sort of collect our goals here and have a brief discussion / query of you as to how close we have gotten to any of those. And I'd like to collect our pluses and our deltas, which both Annette and Hamilton have actually. Do we have those at places? Yes. Okay, great. The two, Arthur and I had talked earlier, and the two goals that we had going in were, one, to find consensus where possible and where it isn't, to collect all views of the topics discussed and report them to the council for action, as opposed to debate them as we had talked about previously, or just had a constructive conversation about at the very beginning of this process. The second one was to create a safe place to talk about these issues so we all felt comfortable sharing our views. Are there other goals that we should be putting up here? And Arthur, if you can, so I don't have to look behind my head here.
Sure. Anybody wants to speak? Bonnie, microphone.
Is there something at places I'm missing?
There's a memo that was in the back of today's packet, and the memo talked about homework, and it was also mentioned in the staff report.
It was at the very end of when we got it. Oh, in the packet.
I wanted to go back to our very beginning and remind ourselves what it was we were going to achieve.
Maybe for the benefit of this group, I'll read the memo. Shall I do that?
Yeah, and the first item is going to be taken as one of the separate items, so you can skip that. Just go to number 2, 3, and 4.
So it says goals. So the co-chairs sincerely hope that you will join us for the last EAC meeting. As part of our final meeting, we are organizing our discussion of the continual learning agenda item here into the following parts. One is we'll talk about later. 2 is goals. What were the goals the committee was to attain when it started? The co-chairs will share their understanding of these goals with the group and then ask for other committee members for their understanding of what these goals were. The co-chairs will then lead a brief discussion to learn how well these goals were met or not. Then will be pluses and deltas. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah. So were there other goals other than these two that we had? Lisa?
I mean, broadly for what we're doing here, correctly?
Very broadly.
All right. Then it was certainly to review the policies that were coming from the city and provide our input to the programs, so to the more implementation part in the programs. I think that was a clear one we were given. I'll come back later to was that a pro or in the con, but it was clearly a goal. And then I think another one we all had was, it goes to the safe place, which was that we all got to share our views, right? There wasn't, just one person talking all the time or something like that. So those were the two.
Anyone else?
Ellen, you had your hand up?
Will you read the goals again? I can't really
You
understand.
can't read my writing?
No.
The first one was, and it's long, I just abbreviated it up here.
That's good.
Find consensus where possible, and where it isn't, collect all views of the topics discussed and report them to the City Council for action, as
Okay.
opposed to resolving them here.
All right.
Create a safe place to talk about these issues so that we all feel comfortable sharing our views. Those were the two that the co-chairs had offered initially. Then the ones that Lisa just mentioned were that we were to review the policies and give input on programs, and that we all got to share our views, which took us a couple of meetings to figure out. Shannon.
Listening to the
Microphone.
public and getting public input, is that in there?
Okay. Hamilton?
This is a little bit high, might be too high level, but I mean, I feel like the goal was to do the long-term plan for Palo Alto to provide stewardship to try and create really the best possible future we can for Palo Alto by setting the policies that are within the control of the city.
Create best possible future. Is that okay? And it's probably not spelled correctly. Jennifer?
In the create best possible future on a more granular level, my understanding was our purpose was to integrate both public input and PTC input and the existing comp plan in a satisfactory manner.
Integrate existing comp plan and PTC input and public. Okay. Anyone else? Annette?
Simple goal is just getting it done. I mean, that's, getting it off the table, right? And getting it approved, maybe.
Okay. Steve?
We had two different.
Microphone?
It is on.
Okay, just a little closer. Okay.
We had two different councils that appointed members. We did not appoint our members. There are lots of comments in the notes, Hamilton and others, that I agree with. If the goal was, it should have been to have a committee that was representative of the residents and others in Palo Alto, that was a failure, and it hamstrung this effort. There was one renter, there was one person, Ellen, who represented the senior population. The chamber was not represented, business was not represented, developers were not represented. We had a kerfuffle as to whether Whitney and Heidi and Arthur were voting members or not. It was a failure to me.
Okay, so
and it affected everything.
Members
Now, that wasn't our goal because we didn't control it, but.
Understood. But the question here is, was the membership representative of the city? Bonnie?
Yeah, I agree with Steve, but one of the things that I was hoping as a personal goal,
Yeah.
and it's sort of related to share views, was to learn from one another different views. And what we failed to do was to have a process where we could have meaningful dialogues with respect to the views. And it just happened just now when people had some good comments, and some I could agree with 100%, some maybe I could agree with 70%. There was no opportunity to have a discussion on the individual comments, because the way the meetings were structured was this boom, 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 somebody said something else, somebody said something else, and except in the committees, at these Tuesday evening meetings, we did not have an opportunity to have in-depth discussion on some of the issues. It could have been better. I don't know how it could have been arranged better, but that was another area where we shared views but did not adequately discuss them.
I'm going to paraphrase that.
So, and I also would have hoped that we could have all learned from each other, from our different perspectives. And of course, had this, the appointees, had we been from a more diverse representation of the community's interests, we could have even learned more. And to respect other different viewpoints and grow from learning about those different viewpoints and not get stuck in our ways. So that was one thing I was looking forward to. And I think to some extent that was a success. but because we're not completely representative, it wasn't a great success.
So the way I've paraphrased this is, where did we learn from others? And there's a spectrum of CAC and subcommittees. We can come back to that, perhaps.
Is that a goal?
I'm not sure it is, but it's worth measuring, I think.
I think it's important.
Yeah. I'm going to allow it. Elaine?
I'm not, well, I'm not sure that this is necessarily a collective goal, but I think just building off of what Bonnie was saying, I think a personal goal that I would have liked to have seen fulfilled a little bit better was just a collegial environment, getting to know everybody a little bit better on a more personal level, because I think that is what kind of facilitates that sort of learning opportunity. So I had hoped, I guess, initially that this was a place where we could all get to know each other much better.
Did we get to know each other better? Okay. Annette?
Well, I just wanted to add to what Elaine and Bonnie said, and I think both of these are excellent, and I actually would agree with my own personal goal, and I'd maybe make it in the personal comment. But I was really struck by a conversation I was having with another committee, and I wonder if the next time through, and this is sort of off topic, but it's relevant to this point. When the Coverly Committee, and I know, Bonnie, you were on that, met, they took the areas that they were going to be looking at, and they split all the members into groups. And so, like, you take each element and split members, and you'd have to work on the composition to get the right selection. And that's where they really did all the dialogue and the sharing, and they got to know each other, and they really had that vital conversation. And then that group came back to the bigger group and presented. And this is really sort of a suggestion for the future, and I don't know if we can do that because of various reasons with the comp plan, but if we had done it that way, we would have all gotten to know our group much better. We would have gotten to share our views and probably learn from each other. And I thought that was an excellent way to go. So.
And the process that they use, again, just in brief?
Well, it's a little different. I don't know. Bonnie can talk to how they split them into groups, but there were a number of different areas that the Coverly task force was looking at. Pardon? Oh, I thought you were. Okay. Jen was.
This is where there were
Jen
working
can talk
groups,
about it.
and then the working groups came back
But the
together.
concept would be here for the comp plan is each one of the elements that we're looking at, we would have a subgroup, maybe some of the smaller ones anyway, and make sure the composition in that group was balanced, as Bonnie described, and then they would report back.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, do you want to comment on how?
Hang
Yeah,
on
I
one
think
moment, Jen. Let me just get Steve, because he was before you. Go ahead.
I think maybe Hamilton
Microphone?
mentioned it. It's on.
You just need to be a little closer so it's on.
One challenge was the size. The size combined, in retrospect, the 3-minute everybody going around the room didn't work. It took up too much time. My own perception was we were basically talking at each other. In our Business and Economic Subcommittee, we had the very shortest element. We had, 2 3-hour meetings or 3 meetings. It felt really good. In the Land Use Committee, we had really different opinions, but it felt better. I think we were cramming too much into an agenda to have a conversation. We had 2 or 3 meetings on elements that were very, very long, and it was hard. So, I mean, the subcommittee atmosphere felt a lot better, a lot more collegial to me, and maybe it has to do with the size.
Okay, good. I captured the discussion process and size over here. Anything else, Shannon?
Microphone? Microphone?
we tried to see some of the comments like you only want go once. You remember those cards like green if you like what somebody says and red if you don't like it. I mean, we tried to do other things and they didn't go very well. So I think we can keep that in mind, that we did try to create more, or staff suggested a variety of ways to facilitate more discussion, and they either would have taken a lot longer than we have, or we didn't like them. And so I'm not sure that, and you can't know everybody. I think we need to look at the product. And to Steve, that you feel that there is some that were not represented, I can think of a lot of subcategories of me that were not here, right? Like the things that I care about. I would have liked to see 6 more people from different groups, and some that know about toxics, and they weren't here. So we had one person more or less to look at environmental issues, and I think you represented those groups pretty well, and I don't know that you need a lot more people to represent one type of thing, because we already have, like you said, too many in a way. So that's all.
Okay, Doria?
Shani kind of said what I was going to say, but I think given the constraints of the time frame, which was not something we got to decide at all, I don't really see how it could have been much different. We probably should have spent, twice as long on this, and had many more subcommittee meetings because they were more productive, just purely because of the numbers. So that's all.
Okay. I'm going to go quickly through. Whitney.
I'd just like to say that I was thinking about, I agree, I think that positive was a subcommittee as well. I think more of the discussion came out at the subcommittee, and there was a willingness to listen to different opinions. But I think the size was one component of it. But the other thing is the subcommittees were done sort of by issue or topic, and it was different when it got back to the collective CAC. It was more like a group edit session over and over again, and we were able to dive into issues in the subcommittee, and I think that that was helpful to further different ideas.
One other thing.
Yeah.
Dan. The length of the sections and the number of programs and policies in some sections led to an editing complex or an editing focus. And I had thought originally we were at more the vision and policy level and not expected to rewrite every line or every third line in the comp plan. And that's what it felt like it devolved into me, except for the very few policy issues where the committee did achieve its goal of offering differing opinions when we had differing opinions, like on the height limit. And so I think the structure of the thing got into this language, this word or that word, rather than kind of what kind of city do we want.
Dan?
Arthur.
So a few things. Firstly, I haven't talked at all. So one thing is that the process of appointing the CAC was flawed. First of all, I agree with the premise that was made that it should only be residents and that there are other people who are representative but aren't voting. They don't live here, they may work here, they may do other things here, but this is essentially just like the Planning Commission, Planning Transportation Commission is required to be residents. I think it makes sense for the CAC to be comprised of residents. But I do think that what happened is that the city manager appointed the CAC, and it was done in a way that was skewed in various ways. And so the council had to correct that and appoint additional people, which essentially made the group even more unwieldy. Now I note that the previous comp plan, which was finished in 1998, was started in 1992, and it was a committee of 37 people. So it was a larger committee, but on the other hand, it had a longer charter. So what happened here is the whole process was in some sense confused. There was a PTC process that went on for 4, 5, 6 years. Then there was a CAC process that was expected to last a year, year and a half, and lasted more like 2 years. And so I think that there were unrealistic expectations of how long it would last. I think it would have been better if the council had, when it formed the CAC, had articulated what its goals were in terms of who should be appointed and what kinds of representation was needed. And maybe even the council should have appointed it, because after all, they're worried about not, in a council-appointed thing, it'd have to be a Brown Act. We wound up being Brown Act anyway, so it would have been better if they had just gone, we would have been faster if they had just gone through with it and appointed us in the first place and had the appropriate balance as they should have done. I also think that in a group of 21, 25, 37, in a large group, it does not make sense to have us be able to do detailed deliberations here. And it would not, and just as Shani mentioned, we really didn't have alternatives in terms of how we do it other than giving everybody a fair share to speak. And we experimented with that and experimented also with the idea of having more of a discussion afterwards where people can raise their cards. And I think that balance between everybody speaking and people commenting afterwards in a discussion was helpful when we were dealing with one element at a time. But when we had more than one thing on the agenda, the topics, the popcorning afterwards didn't work very well because they tended to be abbreviated. And so we couldn't have, one round of everybody commenting and enough time to popcorn on that. And we were sort of, we spent a lot of time on land use and transportation, which I think were really important. Those are perhaps the most important elements. We talked about integrating them. We never did. Not clear the council integrated them. Maybe the planning commission will look at them as an integrated unit, but I'm willing to bet that it won't happen. I think we took we looked more at the 1998 comp plan. I think we did not take enough advantage of what was in the PTC recommended drafts. There's a lot of work there. It was done intensively over a period of years. And I think we would have been well served to have done more work based on the PTC draft. Not all of it was good, but it was an intensive amount of work that we essentially largely abandoned, didn't start from, not completely starting from scratch, but essentially didn't start from there. And I think that in retrospect, maybe that would have been a better thing to consider in detail. I think that it would have been more helpful if, in terms of the public commenter, the public commenter we had that at the beginning. We tended not to see much of it later on, but the questions were kind of diffuse, and it was not clear. The questions, to the extent that the public commented, it was not clear how to actualize their comments. They weren't encouraged to make comments on specific programs or policies. They were at a high level. It was not clear sometimes what the comments really meant, what they were talking about. So I think that to the extent that we think about this, let's think a little bit, maybe next time, let's think a little bit more about how we incorporate public comment so that we can ask them more specifically to comment on particular things they'd like to see and particular things they'd like to change. I do think that there are opportunities for being at a high level, and perhaps we could have done more about that. At the very beginning, maybe we could have had a meeting before we got into any of the elements, where we had some high-level discussions about that, about what we see as the future of the city. I'm guessing that we would have had, for 25 people on the CAC, or 24, we would have had 24 or 25 views. I think that there would have been that much difference in terms of that. So I'm not sure what that would have done, except maybe brought out some high-level issues for us to think about. So I think that in some sense, if the main thing I would do differently is, one, I would take more advantage of the PTC's work, and two, I would have had a plan to have this take longer time anyway, rather than the rush. We sort of extended the time anyway, and then we rushed at the end. I think we should have been more realistic, and I think the next go-around should be more realistic about how long the process really takes.
Hang on, I wanted to get,
It's a follow-up exactly what he said.
okay, quickly, and then Doria, and then Julia. Ellen, did you have something more? And then Elaine, and then Lisa, and Whitney.
Okay, I just want, because I was a graduate and alum of the
First one.
the 37, oh wait, am I on? Yeah, I'm on. Of the 92 to 97 comp plan process. And what you said, Arthur, that's exactly what happened. And it was, we started out with vision, the 37 of us, we started out thinking really high level. And then we were given like classes on Architecture 101 or Zoning Code 101. All the members of, we were, got a lot of information to go with. Then we broke into subcommittees on issues, and we had good substantive discussions. And then after all that stuff got put in, then there were committees that did the editing, that actually did that, and that was in subcommittee. I don't remember all the details, but for the future comp plan, somewhere there may be a file of how previous comp plans were done, and you might, somewhere these comments, because exactly what you said, Arthur, is what happened in the previous comp plan, how that was developed. We started high level, we had a SWOT analysis, it was really exciting, and you got a lot of input from the public. Now the PTC work might have been good, but it had no public input. And that was, it had very little. There were I understand there were two people in the committee when PTC got together and wrote some good stuff. And I looked a lot of that in the beginning of this. I had the PTC book that you gave us. And, we did try to integrate it, at least I did. I looked at that, and I think the staff did. So anyway, I recommend to staff that we have future comp plan processes, have a file somewhere so our comments are not lost. So I agree with what Arthur was saying, because I experienced it and it was good. And that was the comp plan that we looked
Previous
at.
to this one.
That was a pretty good plan, and we only had to really change it a little bit, really.
Thank you, Doria.
Really quickly, because I have to leave. I don't think it was the best process. I don't think it was the worst process. I think one of the problems was the people that were chosen to be on this comp plan were chosen mostly, almost all of us, because they had predictable and reliable points of view that were already expressed. And I'm not sure that was really the best idea. It's a little overly politicized for my taste. But I would really like to, as I have to leave, I would really like to thank the staff, especially, and the co-chairs who tried, I think, really hard to make this be as good a process as it could be. And yeah, you get come to the Planning Commission, you get another cut at it.
Doria, thank you. Jenny, you're taking off too? Thank you, too. Julia.
So a couple things. It looks like we've gone past goals and onto plus and
Yes,
minuses, right? So
we kind of went there.
I decided to jump in. I would say again, this is more of a council appointing versus us as a committee, but I think it seems that, or city manager, the appointments were made, it seems to me, in a little too politicized way and too focused on the land use element. I mean, it seems pretty clear that the reason why 5 more people were added on and the imbalance had to do with that element, although I would say all of the elements are significantly important, and we missed the diversity in those other elements because we were so focused on that. And with that, I think that we need to, if we want to have more diversity on these, we need to change the application and change the outreach. I saw the application the first time it came out, and I said, I have not been on enough commissions and committees. I'm not going to get this. I'm not going to apply for it. And then, I didn't do it. And then the second round came out and said they wanted people under 35, renters, and south side of Palo Alto. And I thought about it and realized, if I don't apply for this, no one like me is going to apply for this, because we just don't fit the criteria. So the application needs to be changed if you realistically want people, younger renters to be part of these committees. Secondly, the council needs to do a better job. Those three criteria, they picked 5 people to add to the committee. None of them were under 35. None of them were renters. And I assume most of them were from the south side of Palo Alto. I was picked as the 6th person to replace someone who had been taken off. So, if you're going to say that that's important to you, follow up on it and add those people. So, again, none of you are part of that decision, but I think that absolutely needs to be, pushed forward in future committees if that's actually something that's cared about. And I wish, I know we've talked about a few things that we wish we had done at the very beginning. I remember one of the first meetings, maybe 2 meetings, we spent so much time on how we were going to structure the meetings and how many minutes we were going to get. And I wish we had spent more of that time on, what we wanted the structure of the plan to be. And I know that it was difficult because the council has a way that they wanted to see the plan, and we kind of realized through the process we might want it to be a bit different. But I think it would have been incredibly useful to have a better working meeting with the city council and really worked through, instead of trying to guess what they really meant or didn't mean, in a more casual setting, how much should we flesh out these programs and what should we be focusing on? I think a lot of that was guesswork done towards the end, and I think the chairs did a good job of clarifying a lot of that, but it would have been nice to have that from the beginning, a bit more structure. And as for just a quick comment on the, or anecdote on the safe place goal, and we also talked about those red and green cards. I think that the committee did work really hard in making this a safe space. I thought it was fantastic when we had those red and green cards, and it was horrible, and everyone agreed that it just felt nasty. And regardless of whether we have different views or not, no one wants to hold up a giant red X saying, so I appreciated that about the group. Thanks.
Whitney, I think you were next.
So we had, let's see, so there are 2 goals. One was to create a way to share different viewpoints, and one was to create the best possible future for the city. Those are 2 that you wrote up there. I had this down. I had written down my lessons learned, and something that was just raised really, I feel the need to voice it. It's a little bit of a popcorn, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I see the city as a balanced sort of ecosystem. It has different entities and different uses for different purposes. To say that only residents should be involved in a process for a city, I think is pretty short-sighted. For me, I represent the largest landowner in the city of Palo Alto and one of the largest employers, and an entity that's not leaving. It's going to be in Palo Alto forever. And I think companies that choose Palo Alto, they choose it for a reason. They are invested in the future of Palo Alto. Many of their employees live in Palo Alto, and they want to know what's happening in Palo Alto too. So there shouldn't just be an automatic distrust of their knowledge, their ideas, or their motivation behind being involved in a public process. And they have a lot of different viewpoints and information that the group here doesn't have. And I think to meet the goals that you had identified for yourself, to say they shouldn't be involved is, I think, a mistake. At minimum, I think the chamber should have been involved, or some other entities. I recognize that when I started, I was sort of seen as an outsider in here, and it's frustrating that after 2 years, there might be some lingering issue with my involvement. But I hope that I provided another vantage point from which to consider ideas, and that I cared about the project and the outcome of the project. So I recognize that trust takes a long time to build, and the group sort of started out a little shaky on the trust, but I thought over time we really grew to become a more cohesive group, and the trust was stronger. I think the subcommittee, by breaking up the format and using the subcommittees, I think that really helped build the trust. There was a point in time, I think, at one of the council actions that kind of dissolved that trust to some extent. But I do believe that the group, you know, in the way the CAC was working together, that trust was on the rise, and people felt more comfortable in sharing their opinions.
Thank you. Lisa, and then we'll come back to Elaine and Ellen.
So some of these have already been made, so it's kind of to the positive and then the negative or change things. So the positive was certainly that I got to work with all of you. I mean, I think it's been a great experience and learned a lot. Yes, I wish I'd known you even better personally, and, you know, so there are things I would improve, but that's definitely been one. And the fact that the city council and staff actually had a CAC at all, I think is very positive, because many cities wouldn't. And whether we think we did a great job or not a great job, right? The fact that we exist at all, I think, is a very positive, and I think this type of involvement should go forward. And then going to the goals, it feels like we've met most of them, so that's a positive. So I'll go to the negative or the delta, but it is in the context of I'm still glad I did this, and I'm glad we did this, right? So it's only in the sense of the improvement. Thinking back to the very beginning, I do still feel that we may have gotten a clear message from City Council as to our role, but I don't know that City Council was actually aligned on it. And the City Council membership obviously changed during our tenure on the CAC, right? So I think at the very beginning, when coming from City Council, and I know Dan and Arthur, you shared that with us, was that the council really wanted us to focus on the programs more than on the vision and the higher level and such, which frankly, to Bonnie's point too, I don't find as much fun, but it's certainly important. It would have been a lot of fun, I think several people mentioned this, if we could have done at the very beginning that more holistic, big picture, you know, blank sheet of paper. What is the future in the context of already having a very good plan, right? We weren't starting from scratch. I think it would have done a few things. One is bring us closer with council and where they were going. Secondly, I think it would have given us all that chance to really think the big picture and see I think the vision part of it. And that would then give us a better foundation than to dive in and to do the program. So I would do that differently. Whether in the future City Council and staff would want a body like the CAC to get involved more broadly or more narrowly is totally their decision. But I think it depends a little bit on maybe a little bit more thought into that, and also communication with us in the CAC. Along those same lines, I think it would have been helpful at the beginning and then a couple of times during, if council had been willing, or could have been representatives of council rather than the full city council, to have some joint meetings with us like in this room, to really talk through things. How are we doing? Are we doing what they're thinking, what they're looking for? Is it working for us? You know, are we on the right track as far as, I think that would have been helpful. And that is not in any way a negative to staff, who has done an awesome job from my perspective. But I actually feel it's not quite fair, because we're all in a sense working for the city council in this context in a way. It's helpful to have that direct dialogue. So that's not in any way a negative. It's really more how would we have added to that. Several of us have mentioned, I do think this group when we started was too big. And whether it's Annette's idea, you know, how to do that, another thought I had along the same lines was have a larger group, maybe 50, that's kind of a vetting, an input, a place that a smaller group that's the real CAC, maybe in a business context, I tend to find if you have more than 10 people, you're not going to get decisions made. Now, if you're not a decision-making body, it doesn't really matter. But if the future one might be more focused on that, and we're actually coming to decisions and aligning on positions. I think 10 is about max. And I like the idea of the representative, and I absolutely feel that it should include the younger and renters, et cetera, that you said. And also to Whitney's point, I think there should be some business. So whatever it is, but it's only 10 people, and they're the ones that do the core brunt work of this with staff and with city council. A broader group could then have more constituencies, more representation. You would go back and forth to them, but they wouldn't be doing the deep dive work. It would be more of, here's the idea we're working on, let's get inputs, have we missed anything? And maybe get a flavor for what the feel is. So that was one thought. I'm sorry, minor in the context of my comments, but I do think that Stanford and the school should have votes. I don't think Planning Transformation Committee should, because they get it later, and so I think that was appropriate. But I don't think that. But again, hopefully we still heard the good inputs, and I think. Oh, the last would be more a question, and it may be for later, is whether staff and the council found having the CAC useful. I'd be very interested in the feedback from that. I mean, going back to the goals, did we do what, even though it changed, the council wanted, and has it been helpful, and are there any things we would do differently from that perspective? So sorry for that long, but again, even with all I said on the things I would do differently, I'm very, very glad and honored that I got to be part of it and at least get to know you all a little bit. Would have liked to know you better, but it was worthwhile. It was really great to see the commitment and just the fact that we all care a lot about our city. So anyway.
Lisa, thank you. I'm forgetting who's next. Ellen? Or Ellen and then Elaine. Go ahead. And then Annette, we'll come back to you and Hamilton. Or Steve, Annette, and then Hamilton.
Basically, I see this as a management problem, and maybe they appointed the wrong people. And what they did was put out applications and maybe not thought through as well what they wanted to achieve. But every one of us actually applied for the job, and we got it. And I applied. I'd be very interested to know why each of us did so, but I applied because I think that I can, and my job is to be a link to the senior population, which is really pretty silent population, and input to city council affairs. And I have worked from the beginning to be a link through my different networks, which idea I got from Hillary when we were working on the Expo May 30th, 2015. And when they first asked us to pool our networks, I was shocked. I thought it was an invasion of privacy, and I still do. But nevertheless, I've come around to it, and I'm pretty good at working my networks now. And so I have learned a lot from the experience of being on this job, which I applied for. And why did I apply? Because I was asked by one of the senior groups to monitor the transportation progress of the long-term plan, and the only way I could do it was to apply for the general CAC and then hope I get appointed on the transportation committee. Now, one of the interesting things, my experiences on the transportation subcommittee, which I think accomplished a lot, was one of the members stated, the way I interpreted it, that the council didn't want us to look at the programs. And the programs are what interest me the most. And I always, when I was reading and doing my homework, I would just scan the policies, and then I would look at the programs and I see how could the seniors participate in this. A good example is the goal of shared riding and cutting SOVs. How could seniors participate in this? And what you can do, and I not only want them to participate, I want the data to go down into the big database, to see that it's working, an active group. So basically, I think it's our fault if We didn't contribute what the city council wants, and we did our best, and I'm really pleased to know all of you, and I have to tell you, my last communique to the senior groups and using my network was a statement saying, it's over, this is your last chance. It's your last chance to convey ideas to the city council through the CAC. And from now on, you do it through the Planning and Travel Commission. And that's where it's moved to, and we've got to move with it there. So.
Great. Thank you. Elaine, and then we'll go to Steve, Annette, Hamilton, and then Arthur wants another.
I feel a little bit bad because I wasn't going to say very positive and optimistic things, so I apologize for following you. On the two goals that you set out first, did we collect views? I think we did do a good job of that, so I'll start with that. I do think that was a positive. We were able to, maybe it wasn't the best process, and I know we didn't get to have the discussions that we would have liked to, but I think we were able to at least placehold a lot of different views, so that's good. As far as the safe place, I actually, on several occasions, I've raised to staff that I did not feel this was a safe place, both in this larger committee and in the subcommittee level. I think, and Don McDougall is not here, but he put it well at one time. I just had a casual conversation with him afterwards, and he said, it's actually really great when people show passion, and that is definitely something to be fostered. I think there were moments where one person's passion may have triggered another person's sort of dismissiveness or not ire. I'm not sure what the right word is. I think it obviously a lot of times the passions would induce other passions, and then the counter passion would not always be productive, or not. It's all productive. They're all important viewpoints. I guess I'm saying I didn't feel like we all respected each other's views, and sometimes there were some comments that didn't sufficiently acknowledge other points of views. So I just want to put that out there because I do think it made it certainly a very difficult and unpleasant process for me. So I would not say that serving on this body, while most of you are very lovely and I enjoy meeting many and working with you, I would not say this was fun. I think this was too long. It was almost 2 years. I'm really worried about how inaccessible this process is to the general public. This is supposed to be a general plan for 15 years that is going to really impact a lot of people in our city, not just the residents, but the people who work here, the people who come here to play. It will affect a lot of people, some of whom might live here only for 2 years, some of whom might live here for another 40. And so I am really concerned that, while I'm glad that a body like this exists, if you really want this to be successful going forward, I think it really needs to be A, made to be fun, and B, made to be understandable so that people understand what's going on and what is happening. I think we had a tendency to dive into the weeds a little bit too much. I think for a body like this, it's going to be most accessible when people kind of understand high-level things. So I agree with a lot of the sort of like, let's talk about the vision comments, because that's really where everybody's got a vision. And yes, we might not agree, 25 people or 50 people or whatever, what the overall vision is, but people want to, play in the sandbox of vision, right? And imagine what their life is going to be. And keeping it at that level is probably where you would get the greatest number of input from the most diverse group of people, the broadest group of people. I also want to echo Bonnie's comments. One of the things that I always had a concern, and this existed for the whole 2 years of this process, was we weren't getting a really grounded education, on what a general plan is supposed to be and what it's supposed to cover, B, how our city works. You know, we have a council manager model. I'm not sure that, you know, a lot of us really understand that or know what our local government system is. And so staff and the professionals who run our city do a really good job of running our city. And, you know, in a way, the elected officials aren't really the folks who are supposed to do all the minutia and the nitty gritty. They're supposed to make the higher level strategic decisions. And I wish we'd gotten a grounding in how our city is run financially a little bit better. I think that was a big missing component. And also just how our city, you know, intersects with other localities and agencies. You know, what is the lay of the land? You know, how does Stanford work? You know, what's our jurisdiction over Stanford? What is the county line? Where do the county agencies come from? We just didn't have that background, and so a lot of times we're just shooting at our hip. You know, whatever we feel like is the answer of the day. But there's real information that should go into the thoughts and the comments that we offer, and absent that, because I learned a lot for sure, but I think it would have helped if all of us had gotten like a basic grounding. So yeah, I guess and I do also want to echo some of Julia's thoughts about having more young folks. I liked Hamilton's comments and his written comments about having folks in high school. If you think about it. You know, in 2030, I don't think, you know, anybody here in 2030 is going to be in their 30s or their 40s or, you know, and so, you know, I think the youngest of us will probably be in our 50s or something like that. And I'm serious, right? So I'm a little bit scared for the future of Palo Alto because we didn't put anybody on this body who is going to just, you know, realistically represent the 20s, the 30s, or whatever in 2030.
Bonnie's gonna wait around to do her third one.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, Bonnie, you're still not going to be 30 in 2030. So I guess, you know, I just wanted to put that in context because that was something that always worried me at the very beginning of this process. It still worries me. I feel like to some degree, you know, the reasons why my husband and I chose to stay in Palo Alto was, in a way, I think I'm a little bit worried that they'll be in jeopardy, you know, in 15 years. So sorry to be a downer, but that's where I stand.
No problem. Great. Thank you. Steve, then Annette, Hamilton, and Arthur.
I think there are a lot of mistakes that were done to us, and I think there's one really whopper that we did to ourselves. We are a group divided about growth and divided about what that means for so-called residential neighborhoods. I lived in a residential neighborhood most of my life, and I disagree with everybody who used that phrase. But we should talk about it. Not in my experience. I know homeowners that live in residential neighborhoods that also disagree with you. I think there was a confusion between residents and homeowners. Okay? But the thing that we did to ourselves was we didn't take 5 meetings to pursue, educate, and talk to ourselves. 5 meetings about what growth means and the impact of growth. We nibbled around it on this program. We fought about the language, moderate job growth in the business element, but we never had hours and hours and hours of discussion that would humanize us, maybe bring us together, and educate us about what are the real differences in facts. So 30 years ago, we used more water than we do now. We have 15,000 more people. 30 years ago, we had 4,000 more kids in the schools. 30 years ago, the air was dirtier. 30 years ago, there was less traffic. I agree. I agree with that, but we got caught up in all this fear stuff and never really took on that central divisive issue in which we could have informed ourselves and offered something back to the council. I don't expect that we would agree, but I would expect we would better understand and clarify the disagreements. The second muck-up that was kind of we bought into, but it was done to us, is this is the comp plan. It's to 2030. That's all I work on my life, for people that do stuff to 2030 and 2040. It's not what Palo Alto should be like in 2018. And in that respect, it doesn't matter a damn hoot what the last city council or this city council, which disagreed with the last city council, means. They shouldn't be telling us what to do. We should be planning for a city in which there will be 5 more new city councils. Okay? There are always transitions in power. Look at Washington. If all you did was say, well, Obama was for this, but he's out, now Trump's for this, we ought to do what he says. That's no way to plan anything. And so we got caught up in what we think about is happening today, not 2030. And I'll end. There are 45% of the people who are like Julia, they're renters. They're almost now 20% of the people who are like Ellen. That's a scandal for the formation of a committee. I think we should have had a developer. I disagree with you about residents, but there are resident developers, there are resident business owners, there are resident people from Stanford. I went to the meeting on Friday, the Silicon Valley at Home Housing Authority of Santa Clara meeting on housing for low-income residents, and they had a developer and they had someone from the League of California Cities who disagreed with a lot of the policies. It was a really good discussion with a lot of consensus at the end. I think those people should be brought in. I think the structure of the committee really hamstrung us.
I think, Annette, were you next?
I apologize, Annette. Thank you. We'll come back to you, Bonnie.
Well, as a transition into my real comments, I wanted to just add some positive things. I think it was good that we did the housing element as sort of earlier. It would have been really cool to have sort of a liaison from that group to participate in this one. I think also, as far as the positives, I thought time comments, with all respect to, and I agree, we didn't have enough dialogue, et cetera, but that in many ways was very good. It all made us a little bit crisper and moved it along. Of course, the chocolate, of course, was like one of the highlights of the whole thing, and the food as well. So, thanks again to everyone, and especially Lisa and all the good meals that we received from the city. I think on the cons, I'd agree the dots did not work at all for me, and that many of our comments in the comp plan were really too prescriptive. They were really, and the council really called that out, also. So I think that's something we have to worry about for the next. But I'd really like to go into this whole thing about what we've been talking about as far as vision, and that would have been good. I think I agree with the comments that were made that there could have been more education at the beginning of each section. Actually, I think this time the visioning was sort of done by that one-day effort. I forgot what it's called, Palo Alto, something. This sort of came together, and it really did attract a huge audience of people from the city, and that really did bring together a lot of visioning, although it really never went into the comp plan. It really was sort of a recruiting for this comp plan, but I'm going to leave my comments on how I think recruiting should be done to another time. That obviously was a real failure for whatever reasons, because we didn't have the composition that everyone would have desired. I am still a little bit on the fence about this concept of voting and non-voting members. And I'm not sure why we even had that. We didn't even take that many votes. There were only a couple of things, and I don't think it really would have made, one whit of difference one way or the other if we counted the non-voting members in or out. I think Whitney has been an amazing resource, and to the Stanford obviously is a absolutely critical stakeholder in this whole process. And so I think, I always learned every time Whitney spoke, so that's obviously critical. I think the chamber, I say this with two feelings. You should have been included, obviously, as a key element. Of course, with the staff of two, it would have been very, very hard for them to make a commitment for this length of time. So maybe someone on their board or someone from their membership could have been a developer, as Steve said, or someone else that had a business viewpoint. I would have liked to see a really small, locally owned business person, but boy, that would really be impossible, because they spend all their time keeping the doors open. I think the school, and again, this has nothing, it's not a personal comment, I didn't think the school, having someone from that community or the school board was particularly critical. I think more so having parents with small kids that could really represent that, to me, was a critical element. And I would be fine to have the planning commissioner be a voting member. And again, I'm totally ambivalent or curious about this whole thing about that perspective. And many of our boards and commissions don't always require residency, so that doesn't seem to be a real barrier. Maybe if we had someone that was going to represent something that was not Stanford or schools or something I can't even think of, sustainability that came from back east or came from another community, that wouldn't be appropriate. But I think we need to think about that with a grain of salt. So chamber, school board, no. I think it would have been interesting to have a council liaison. If you look at a lot of the boards and commissions, they actually have a council member that's sort of assigned to this group. And I think that there really has been sort of a barrier between this group and council. And we really haven't, we sort of have to wait until we get it to council, till we get any feedback. And then we have to come back and sort of redo things. I still think it would be an incredible challenge to get volunteers, especially the younger people, to come to this. I'm not saying they shouldn't be here, whether it be a teen or a young parent. Boy, it's hard to get people to volunteer for anything. So I think that's a wonderful aspirational goal. I think it's a real challenge to find the right person. So we're lucky you came and joined the effort. So it's sort of in closing, I think saying everything we did about not having maybe the right mix of people, I think it was really important in the subcommittee thing that we had the staffs from the different departments, because even though we might not have had the right composition in many people's mind, which I'm fine with, we really did have the staff that related to the element that would come and sort of talk about the issues. And again, we could have had more, I think, education, but they came and sort of said, this is what's happening, and they added, I think, the content to any of the discussions that we were having. Maybe we missed a little bit, but my feeling is, in the end, we did come out with a product that we're taking to council that is an excellent document, and it is, even though we did have a couple of stumbling points, and I can't say that I agree with every single thing in here, because I don't, but I think it was a collaborative process, and I do think it will serve as a really good goal as we move forward to 2030. It's hard to know what the future's like. I have to say this, we could have one great earthquake, we might be a small town and 10,000 people again. And
with no cars.
With no cars, right? So it's really hard to think about the future, and we just have to do the best we can. And maybe as sort of a compromise is having the comp plan be reviewed periodically. You can sort of say, this is the way it's going, and boy, that thing does not make sense at all. I mean, I'd like to see some way that you could halfway through, if none of these things became a problem or something else became an issue, how that could be inserted into the document. So again, I just feel that we should be proud of what we've done, and I do think it did come out to represent lots of different views.
Annette, thank you. Hamilton. Arthur, and then Bonnie.
Thank you. There's so many great comments tonight. This is I really love what everyone is saying. And I'm going to reiterate some of them and make a couple of additional points. I want to start with you, Whitney. I really appreciated you being on the committee. It was really helpful. It was also wonderful to have somebody from Stanford I could throw my ideas against, so thanks for listening. I really appreciate you being here. Just on the Stanford, one of the questions is about whether Stanford should vote. I mean, the thing for me is Stanford basically agreed to put all this land under the control of Palo Alto. So I just feel it's not really fair if they don't have a say in the policies of Palo Alto. And they are, essentially, Palo Alto was the town for Stanford. I mean, they are fundamentally integral. And like Elaine said, well, I come from a very strong residential perspective, so technically I should be for only residents. I mean, the community is much more than just the residents. It's the businesses, it's Stanford, it's the small business owners. So, I mean, I do think it makes sense to have, and like Annette said, the voting doesn't really matter. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the council that does it. We're here to put together a body of things, and that's why I think it's important to have PTC representation. We should have had the Chamber of Commerce more involved, really somebody who's going to represent all the businesses as well. Elaine, thanks for sharing. If I contributed to that in my excitement about policies, about making you feel like it wasn't a safe space, I want to apologize. So, I do get passionate about
me.
Policy. Yeah, did. So, but I really appreciate you sharing, and I just want you to know I have a lot of respect for your opinions. The next thing is, I want to talk about something that Steve and Bonnie said, which I thought was spot on. And Bonnie, why couldn't you have said this at the beginning? Not that we were so cumbersome, I'm not sure it would help. But I hope we can do this next time. And that is, I love this idea that you're talking about the beginning of the council, we don't dive into the editing. We say this is our vision, and we sort of talk about the vision. And then we talk about these are the big issues. Like we all knew land use was and how fast we're going to grow is the big issue. So rather than we'll get to that when we do the land use element, we talk about that. And I like what Steve was saying. It would have been great to hear this is why I believe this, because it's really easy to ascribe motivations, but they're not always, sometimes those are projections as opposed to how actually people feel. So if we had started the discussion with Steve's this is what I believe and this is why I believe it, and here's my experience on it, and this would have gotten to Bonnie's thing, rather than try and have these conversations on everything, focus on the big issues that are really the decision. Because once you get past those, then it's much more just minor, it's more about these editing and stuff like that. But the real magic would happen is if you do that up front and then you go to the council and you say, this is what we think, and get the council feedback up front. For me, the biggest failing in this entire process was our interaction with the council. And it didn't help that we had a sort of a transition of the council, but at the beginning we were told, we want you to focus on the programs, and then basically, partly because it got a little bit bloated, but also, for other reasons as well, they stripped out all the programs. They were like, well, you told us to do this. We just spent a year on it, and now you're stripping it out. So we had a fundamental, it's very hard to hit a moving target. We all know, we've all worked on projects. When the goal of the project is changed 2/3 of the way through, it's really disruptive. So I feel like there needs to be more upfront commitment by the city council that essentially can't be changed by subsequent elections, regardless of who's in power. I mean, I thought Steve's point about this, it'd be like if Washington, they're funding and defunding entire departments every 2 to 4 years. You have total chaos and nothing gets done. The same thing here. We need to have consistency, and I think that basically the process of the CAC interacting with council was just fundamentally broken. There wasn't really a clear enough roadmap. It wasn't adhered to. There wasn't enough interaction back and forth. Some of the city council discussions have been very superficial. I don't think we have necessarily delivered the maximum value to them, because I don't think there was a mutual, essentially we didn't agree with the council what we were supposed to deliver to them. And so they weren't really completely happy. You know, Tom Du Bois would say, like, there's too many programs, and we're like, we're too big to deal with that kind of feedback. So there wasn't that process. But if we focused on the big issues first, then got the council bought off on them, I think everything after that would be smoother, and we front-loaded that. I have a couple other things. The summit was really good. And I think 5 years is too long just because there's too many things can change. And then the last thing, oh, and another thing is I learned so much about this city in this process. But another thing that I thought was really interesting, which hasn't been mentioned, is about staff. So staff did a great job. You know, it's not easy to be in their shoes with a room full of people with conflicting opinions that they have a lot of passion about. But the thing that impressed me the most about staff is they listened very well, they incorporated our feedback, and they leveled up several levels. I mean, essentially, collectively, we were struggling in the beginning, and by the end, I felt like we were really good at what we did. That was partly because of some circulation in staff, and the staff kept getting, the people working on this kept getting better and better. Since you're here, you can take that as a compliment. But they really listened, and they really incorporated things. So I thought that went really well. And then the last thing is, despite the challenges we've had and the disagreements we've had, we've actually agreed on a lot. You know, at the end of the day, even though we all realize there could have been substantially better selection process, there will never be a selection process which people say was good. It's just a political reality. And the fact that if you like 100% of the stuff in here, it probably wasn't a compromised document. But I do think we did produce a good output at the end. So thank you for listening.
Hamilton, thank you. Bonnie.
I just really agree 100% with what Annette said, Hamilton said, so I'm not going to repeat all that. And I think what you've got now is some ideas for the future. So people have said, let's review the comp plan. Well, you know, it's taken 10 years since this process started. So if we're going to have a new comp plan in 2030, you're going to have to start this in 3 years again.
2021, you get your applications in.
2021, okay, so you're all ready. So I'm thinking that, and to get people involved, we could be a combination of reviewing this existing plan, getting other citizens, you know, involved in the process, having more summits, and having a kind of a lecture education series to prepare people for the next plan on economics, on forecasting, on the future of retail, because there's lots of articles in the paper now about how retail is changing, how commerce and neighborhoods are not at odds at one another, because if it weren't for commerce, we wouldn't be eating or driving or using our cell phone. I mean, it's all part of our lives. So, you know, what is zoning about? And we could have a series of invite the public to come to these things to get ready for thinking about the future. And this could be a city, little school that the city could have. It was kind of like I'm being nostalgic about the comp plan thing I was on in the 90s, but that's what we had. We had all kinds of speakers coming to us. We had Andres Duaney come and talk to us about all the planning ideas of the time that were exciting. We might have had economists. I don't remember it all, but it was a lot of stuff. The other thing, though, that we probably should have had more of, and maybe we could have done it on our own, but required reading before we came to each element on studies that were going on concurrently. Like, I didn't know that the study for the shuttle was going on until it just came out. It's a great report on how our shuttle system could be improved. But there's no mention of that in the comp plan because we didn't really know it was happening. I mean, somebody knew, but I didn't. So and all the other, there was the parks study that was going on, and there's the Baylands Master Plan. There's all kinds of stuff that should be in the public's eye starting 2020 or 2021, that this is stuff you should, know your city and know how your city can think in the future. A Plan Bay Area is another thing that everybody should know about if you're interested in the future of the city. We are part of a region. So that's just some examples of stuff that you might be thinking about for the future. Yeah, that's about it. And I want to echo my appreciation of all the hard work that the staff did and the co-chairs. Yeah, you said it so well, so I don't have to say it again, but ideas for the future. I'm looking forward to reviewing this comp plan in about 2-3 years, see how we're doing. If it's done by then.
Lisa?
Is actually just a very quick one. We took a group picture quite a while back. Is it available? Yeah. Super. You can send it around. Super. Thank you.
Arthur?
So, firstly, I think that it's the job of the Planning and Transportation Commission to periodically review the comp plan and consider changes to it. And unfortunately, I don't think the Planning and Transportation Commission has done that much. Certainly didn't do it when I was on it, except for the review of this comp plan. I think that the vision of what the task of updating the comp plan morphed. When the Planning Commissions first started doing it in 2007, I don't know. I got on the comp plan in 2006. We seemed like shortly thereafter we started working on it. It was a long time ago. The idea was to update it, simply make some minor changes to it, and the PTC started to do that, but the councils never reviewed what we did for a long time. Then what happened is it went to a new council came on and says, we need to do the comp plan, and we need to broaden the input to it, and then the scope increased dramatically. And therefore, it wasn't just a minor tweak to the comp plan update. It was actually changed the horizon from, originally it was 2020, then it was 2025, then by the time we got it started, it was 2030. And for me, the horizon of 2030 doesn't mean we're planning a comp plan for 2030. It means we're planning a comp plan for every single year from when the comp plan is adopted through 2030, which means it needs to be a living document that handles the conditions of today and the conditions of 13 years from now, not just the conditions from 13 years from now. I also think that I think it was important that we had voices like Whitney. I thought that was important. She added a lot of value to us, to our discussions, and I think it's important stakeholders. We could have had more stakeholders. I agree with the idea of having small businesses involved, but I'm not sure how we could make that feasible. I'm not sure how we could have had, maybe had some. I think having more young people involved, more seniors involved, I think would have been helpful. I wonder about if it's even a 2-year process. Having a high school student involved is kind of hard, especially in their junior and senior years. It's kind of hard, and especially if the process doesn't finish, and then it goes on, and then they're gone when they go off to college. So I don't know how to do that. I do think I understood that when we were appointed, there were members who were appointed who were residents, and then there were ex officio members who were from Stanford, from the school board, and from the PTC. And my understanding of an ex officio member is somebody who has the power of the floor but not the power to vote. That's my understanding of how Robert's Rules of Order and all that kind of stuff handles ex officio members. So that's where that came about. And I think that does make sense. And the next time we need to think about how that is structured to perhaps do that better. If we had this to do it all over again, I think that it might have been better to do a process closer to what was done in 92 through 97. But that would have taken the luxury of having 5 years as opposed to a process where we thought we were doing it with the PTC on a smaller process. I also think that one of the things that I've noticed when I was on the Planning Commission for 8 years is that if you have a particular project that people like or don't like, they'll fill the auditorium. If you have a law, 15, 20 people come out is a lot for dealing with a law. When you're dealing with the comp plan, it's very hard to get people to understand that essentially it's like amending the Constitution. Everything flows from that, but people don't generally come out to speak on issues that are effective on the comp plan. And it was actually near the end of the PTC process on the comp plan where we actually were getting people to come out. We had a lot of people who came out and commented on the transportation element, for example. But I think and we have, we had half a dozen people at most, or maybe 8 or 10 at the most times when people came out and talked at this meeting. So I'm not sure what we could have done better in terms of outreach. I wish we had more representation in terms of the schools, in terms of the things that happened there. There were some schedule issues. We changed to correspond to their schedule, but then they couldn't make it after all, which was unfortunate. Because I think that Stanford is an important part of the community, but most people, not everybody, but most people move to Palo Alto for the schools. And not some people move for other reasons, but most people, when they come here, they're here because they come here originally because they want their kids to go to Palo Alto schools, and so I think that that's important. I'd like to. People have acknowledged Dan and I and our work. I'd actually like to acknowledge all of you. I think that we could not have done this without everybody working together. I think it was a rather collegial group. I think people did have an opportunity to express their views. I think that we were trying to figure our way along in terms of how voting went, and part of that was because of council comments about how voting process. So we're sort of finding our way through that. I think that when we wound up with the idea of trying to achieve consensus where we could, and trying to identify cohesive points of view when we couldn't achieve consensus, I think that was a good goal. I'm not sure how well we achieved it. I think that when we have consensus, that should have been better presented to the council, as opposed to here are the changes that the commission meant. I think if it was a consensus, it should have been clear as opposed to an issue to consider. I wish the council had given us more feedback and we had an opportunity to review what the council said and revise what we did, and mostly that went to staff to revise, and I think staff did as good a job as it could, but there was a little input opportunity for us to weigh in and reflect on council feedback. And I in a longer process that maybe we're talking about in terms of what Bonnie had experienced in the 90s, I think that maybe that would have had a better opportunity for providing that. So I think that if we were in 2030, things are going to be a lot different. I expect. We don't even know all about how it's going to be different. My crystal ball is pretty clouded, and I assume most of yours is. I'm hoping that we have a process more of a major revision in 2030 as opposed to an incremental update.
How many feel that they changed their mind on a topic over the course of a year and a half?
Just say cake, and I think you'll get consensus.
Anyone?
I'd like to hear your view, Dan, and also ideally Hillary's on this, how this has gone.
I think mine's in here.
You've got yours already.
It's been expressed in a variety of ways. I actually think I'm going to write something. Hillary?
Yeah, I don't want to take a lot of time, but someone didn't mention all the homework that you did. I have been so impressed by the amount of reading and thinking all of you have done in this process. Really, it was so wonderful to come every month and to go around, and I know it was frustrating. We were doing the 3-minute thing, but you each offered individual perspectives and insights to the process, and it was because you had done some thinking about these issues. And that's the kind of value that we get as planners out of these community processes. So I hope you feel good about that. I hope you feel good about the work products we created. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. And don't forget to come on the 5th of June for your proclamation.
Lisa, I will share with you this. I did have some personal goals. I really viewed my role here, more as a facilitator, to try and find ways to get the community as represented by us as good or bad as we could, finding a way to talk with each other about these issues as best we could. I didn't look to actively, although I did at times, advocate particular issues one over the other. But I was really holding a lot of that in abeyance to be able to, because I think there is greater opportunity for all of our progress by hearing us speak, and that was as important as what it was we said. And as part of that, with the exception of one topic, really separated myself from a lot of other things happening in the city so that I wouldn't be perceived of as influencing or having a hidden agenda or something of that sort. And one other thing that I ended up getting involved with, as you all know, is basements. I had a personal commitment that I had made to Arthur at the beginning, which was to share all the correspondence with him that I received, which I think I actually managed to do. I was interested in getting to know all of you. I didn't have a chance to meet with all of you one-on-one. Some of the members that aren't at the tables are the ones that I primarily did not have that chance. But for me, that was the most rewarding part of all of this.